RT show. If this happened,
there was no notice, there was no warning, there was no inquiry, it just vanished. It's not surprising. I think if you go back and look at the 2017 Director of National Intelligence report, 7 pages were devoted to RT, and while they accused RT of disseminating Russian propaganda, all the examples that they cited in that report were that RT was giving a voice to Black Lives Matter activists, anti-fracking activists, Occupy activists, third-party candidates, all of which was true. And so I think this was the culmination. We expected it. I was on your show, by the way, when they deleted Trump from the social media and vigorously opposed it, not because I ever want to read another tweet by Donald Trump, but because we don't want these opaque entities, and they know everything about us, we know nothing about them, to wield this kind of censorship. What I didn't expect when I was arguing not to delete Trump from social media was that I would so quickly be one of the victims.
So do you have any access to this archive?
Through the RT.com on contact site is still up. I don't know how much longer, so we've copied them, so at least I'll have them. But no, off of YouTube, and you had hundreds of thousands of views for some of those shows, it's all gone. I want to stress that there wasn't one show on Russia. And the few times that we ever mentioned Putin or Russia was not in very flattering terms. I remember great investigative journalist Alan Nairn using RT, I'm sure, on purpose to excoriate Russia for war crimes in Syria, but we broadcast it. This was a show that, if we had a functioning public broadcasting system, would be on probably late at night. I primarily interviewed authors. I'm an author myself, of course. I've written 14 books. And intellectuals that I admire, Cornel West, Noam Chomsky, Slavoj Žižek, and it was erased for its content. I mean, not because it was Russian propaganda, but because it wasn't, but because there's been such a marginalization of critics of anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism. I'm a very strong supporter, very public supporter of the boycott, divestment, sanction movement, which of course I think was the key issue that saw my great friend Cornel West denied tenure at Harvard. The walls have just closed in, Amy, since I began as a reporter in Central America in the 1980s. There's less and less space for those who are willing to seriously challenge and question entrenched power. I mean, you do it, Alan does it, but it's become a pretty lonely profession. And of course, Bob Scheer, who I write for Scheer Post, but he doesn't have any money, he doesn't have any advertisers, which was also true when he ran Ramparts. So it's becoming harder and harder. I've gone to Substack like Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald, chrishedges.substack.com, and if I can get enough subscribers, I will fund the column and fund the show myself. But that's where we're left at, and of course you pioneered that model for many of us.
And Chris, if you were on RT America right now, if it existed, if direct...
hey everybody. Hello, that's us, I'm on. So I'm going to shut down my boy there, Hedges.
You wrote a piece headlined on the...
So, how are we? Decided to come out and do this podcast while I had the chance. Welcome to the podcast, politics, culture, and some other shit. Like, share, subscribe. Yeah. So tonight I'm going to talk about... It's Friday night when I'm doing this. Do this live on YouTube when I can. And I'll drop it as a podcast over the weekend so it's ready for your Monday morning commute. Send you into your fucking capitalist bosses and a fucking right old stink. So, yeah. Tonight I want to talk about a couple of things. I got into a really fucking bad mood, man. Rishy Sunak. I wasn't going to do a podcast tonight, and then I was really grumbly. Rishy Sunak and the cost of living crisis and the oil companies and the gas companies and what's going on in the world in general got me into a bit of a stink. It doesn't normally overwhelm me. I don't feel overwhelmed by it, but I can get quite animated without losing my temper, if you know what I mean. I don't feel like I lose my temper, but I think I kind of lost my temper with the world a little bit earlier on. So I'm gonna get talking about that, but first I'm going to start with Chris Hedges. So I'll talk about him in a second. He had his whole entire archive deleted off of YouTube. Well, his RT archive. We'll talk about that in a second. As always, updates. So next week the Bonnevilles are playing the Port Rush in Port Rush, the Atlantic Lounge. Then Friday the 15th we're playing Sandino's for the Long Good Friday. We're kind of the house band for that. And then we're playing the Railway Bar in Cookstown on the 16th. Deer's Head, Belfast, Saturday the 23rd of April. And then the Kilkenny Roots Festival on the 30th of April. There's tickets available for all of those. You can go to our website, thebonnevilles.co.uk. So come and see us. Come and have some crack. It's not all misery, you know. But yeah. So let's do this. That's the theme has died down, so that's a good time to. Yeah. So you may know that one of my favourite people in the world, in the public world anyway, let me say that, is Chris Hedges. Who's Chris Hedges? Chris Hedges is an ex New York or Washington Post, New York Times, I think, a war correspondent. He was there for 15 years. He was chased away from it because of his opposition to their war in Iraq in 2003. I love him. I discovered him on YouTube, and since I've bought, I think if not all his books, most of them, and the man is a fucking genius. But as well as being, he's always right. He's one of these commentators that's able to, you'd almost swear they could look into the future because of the things that the way they look at the world. They're able to translate it for mortals like us, and in that regard, they're very important. And there's a few of these people about. For me, Chris Hedges is the number one. He's a Christian man. He's an ordained minister. His father was an ordained minister. His father's brother was campaigning for his father was campaigning for his own brother in the 60s for gay rights. And for that, he was chased out of the church, his own church. So you know the moral backbone that this person was raised with. And it's always a disappointment whenever you see how far, and an apple can fall from the tree. So often you'll see someone whose father was a Marxist or a communist, and then this asshole ends up becoming just a cut and paste fucking neolib asshole. And you see that all the time. This is what you don't see. Someone like Chris Hedges getting his whole moral fibre and his moral direction from examples set by his own father. And obviously he's contributed to that through his own life and his own lessons that he's took on board through his, you have to say, adventures, because Chris Hedges may be an academic, but when you read him and listen to him, this man has been in the firing line, literally and figuratively, many, many times over his career. And he's helped me personally with my worldview, and he's also helped me understand that there are people out there that are moral in the public space. And that's very important to me, because I consider myself to be a very moral person, and people like Chris Hedges inspire me. So what's happened to him is he had a show, if you don't know, you probably do, on RT, Russia, which is the acronym Russia Today, RT. You probably know this as well. And Russia Today was taken down after the invasion of Ukraine. And Chris Hedges had a show called On Contact. Now, Chris Hedges' show had nothing to do with Russia, believe it or not. Chris Hedges is a, among many things, but he passes his critical eye over empire, the American empire specifically. So, and he talks about literature. He talks about his own life, about he teaches in a prison, teaches people in these prisoners, and he says that these guys would destroy any Cornell University or any whatever those fucking universities are called in America, any of those debating teams. These prisoners would destroy them because they are intellectuals, but these are people that they're going to serve lifetime sentences for minor offences, crimes against property. And Chris Hedges teaches these guys in jail. And so this is the type of man he is, and he talks about this a lot on his shows, and his entire archive has been deleted. So I'm going to read you first to set this up. And me personally, this has incensed me. This has really incensed me. I hate this. I put it up on my Instagram page, and I have an Instagram account, by the way, if anybody wants to follow that, you should. I put it up on my Instagram page, and someone commented. They said, and I'm not trying to embarrass anyone, but they said, he hasn't been silenced. He's and this company, he still has a voice, which is true. And this company is entitled to. It's a private company. They can do whatever they want. It's their business model. They can do whatever they want. And if their advertisers don't want someone like him on, then that's fine. And at first glance, there's nothing wrong with that argument. It sort of makes a little bit of sense, but it's also a very shallow argument. It's almost childish in its simplicity. It doesn't take into account the real reasons as to why someone like Chris Hedges would be silenced. Chris Hedges is probably first and foremost these days a critiquer of the empire that is owned by the likes of Google, among others. So you must understand, Google have Pentagon contracts to provide cloud services to the CIA and the National Security Agency and things like that. These things are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more. At the minute, Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, is suing the the American government because they wanted this contract so badly, and they thought they were going to get it, and they didn't. They gave it to Google instead. So Amazon is suing the government. So this is what we're talking about. You're talking about mass fortunes of money, and if it was just that Chris, and maybe it's not just Chris Hedges. There's many, many others that have been dumped, and so it's not just about it. If you think that it's just about Chris Hedges said something so controversial or so bad that they had to get rid of him, he didn't. He's an intellectual. He's providing context. He's giving you reasons and reasoning. And I know that it was RT that was dumped, and then the ripple of that, Chris Hedges was dumped. But this all started with Alex Jones, that head case getting took off social media because he was saying ridiculous conspiratorial things about the Sandy Hook families and the victims of the Sandy Hook massacre, if you remember that school massacre. And he got so bad with it that eventually that the social media companies, one by one, they all fell like cards in a row, or like dominoes, started just deleting Alex Jones off their social media platforms. And everybody cheered that because Alex Jones is horrible and easy to dislike. But people like Chris Hedges and others, Jimmy Dore was one, spoke out loudly against that because it's censorship. It goes against the idea of free speech. And the solution to free speech, or the solution to bad speech, is more speech, is good speech. If you don't like what you're hearing, change the channel. And I know that that's not easy to stomach if you're repulsed by someone like Jones and what he says about victims of a vile crime. And it's not easy to take. But to censor is wrong. Because it starts with the outliers. Chris Hedges mentions this. It starts with outliers. So it starts with Jones. And it moves, and then now, and you can't dismiss this. The president of America, the president of the United States, the ex-president of the United States, Donald Trump, has been booted off social media. These companies can boot a president off social media. That's how powerful they are. Now, who owns these companies? Who makes that decision? And what is it based on? Now, for Jones, Alex Jones, when he got kicked off, if he said anything wrong, he should go to court. If he said something illegal, I should say, he should be brought to court. If he hasn't said anything illegal, there's nothing you can do about this. There should be nothing you can do about this. You have to let him go, because ultimately what happens is people like Chris Hedges are targeted. And there's been many others. Abby Martin, Lee Kemp. These are anti-imperialists, socialists, proper socialists, proper anti-imperialists. And they have been caught up in all this. And it started with the left, by the way, cheering on, as well as others, but mostly by the left and the libs, shit libs, cheering on the deletion of someone like Alex Jones, which is easy to do because he's so vile. But that's where they start. They don't start with Chris Hedges. They start with Jones. Do you get it? So, let's get into this. So, he wrote an article. The great man, as I said, I'm not even going to hide how much of a fan and how much admiration I hold for him. So I've got a cocktail here, by the way. Dark and stormy and a pint of Guinness, as you know is my want. Delicious. Delicious. So here we go. The entire archive of On Contact, the Emmy-nominated show I hosted for 6 years for RT America and RT International, has been disappeared from YouTube. Gone is the interview with Nathaniel Philbrick on his book about George Washington. Gone is the discussion with Kai Bird on his biography of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Gone is my exploration with Professor Sam Sloat from Trinity College, Dublin, of James Joyce's Ulysses. I watched that. That was only a few months ago and it was fucking brilliant. Well, I watched all of these, but that one in particular was brilliant. Gone is the show with Benjamin Moser on his biography of Susan Sontag. Gone is the show with Stephen Kinzer on his book on John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles. Gone are the interviews with the social critics Cornel West, Tariq Ali, Noam Chomsky, Gerald Horne, Wendy Brown, Paul Street, Gabrielle Rockwell, Naomi Wolf and Slavoj Žižić. Gone are the interviews with the novelists Russell Banks and Salar Abdo. Gone is the interview with Kevin Sharp, a former federal judge on the case of Leonard Peltier. Gone are the interviews with economists David Harvey and Richard Wolff. Gone are the interviews with combat veterans and West Point graduates Danny Serchin and Eric Edstrom about our wars in the Middle East. Gone are the discussions with journalists Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi. Gone are the voices of those who are being persecuted and marginalised, including the human rights attorney Stephen Donziger and the political prisoner Mumia Abu Jamal. I think he's a Black Panther. None of the shows I did on mass incarceration, where I interviewed those released from our prisons, are any longer on YouTube. Gone are the shows with the cartoonist Joe Sacco, Dwayne Booth, melted into thin air, leaving not a wreck behind. I received no inquiry or notice from YouTube. I vanished. In totalitarian systems, you exist and you don't. I suppose this was done in the name of censoring Russian propaganda, although I have a hard time seeing how a detailed discussion of Ulysses or the biographies of Susan Sontag and J. Robert Oppenheimer had any connection in the eyes of most obtuse censors in Silicon Valley with Vladimir Putin. Indeed, there's not one show that dealt with Russia. I was on RT because, as a vocal critic of US imperialism and militarism, and of the corporate control of the two ruling parties, and especially because I support boycott, divestment and sanctions movement against Israel, I was blacklisted. I was on RT for the same reason the dissident Václav Havel, who I knew was on The Voice of America during the communist regime in Czechoslovakia. It was that or not be heard. Havel had no more love for the policies of Washington than I have for those of Moscow. And I'll just drop in there, another person that says something very similar to that is another person who I admire greatly, Jimmy Dore. He gets asked to go on the Tucker Carlson show on Fox, and he goes on. And then he gets criticised from the left for going on to Fox News. And he says, I'm not being invited on anywhere else. MSNBC or CNN, no one's inviting me. It's only Fox News that invite him. And then he goes on and he gets to talk to the right from a left perspective. He's very good at it. He's very effective. But that's what he's saying here. It was go on RT or don't be heard. Onwards. Are we a more informed or better society because of this wholesale censorship? Is this a world we want to inhabit, where those who know everything about us, about whom we know nothing, can instantly erase us? If this happens to me, it can happen to you, to any critic anywhere who challenges the dominant narrative, and that is where we are headed, as the ruling elites refuse to respond to the disenfranchisement and suffering of the working class, opting not for social and political change or the curbing of the rapacious power and obscene wealth of our oligarchic rulers, but instead impose iron control over information, as if that will solve the mounting social unrest and vast political and social divides. The most vocal cheerleaders for this censorship are the liberals. Terrified of the enraged crowds of QAnon conspiracy theorists, Christian fascists, gun-toting militias and cult-like Trump supporters that grew out of the distortions of neoliberalism, austerity, deindustrialization and the collapse of social programs. They plead with the digital monopolies to make it all go away. They blame anyone but themselves. Democrats in Congress have held hearings with the CEOs of social media companies, pressuring them to do more to censor content. Banish the troglodytes, then we will have social cohesion. Then life will go back to normal. Fake news, harm reduction model, information pollution, information disorder. They have all sorts of Orwellian phrases to justify censorship. Meanwhile, they peddle their own fantasy that Russia was responsible for the election of Donald Trump. It is a stunning inability to be remotely self-reflective or self-critical, and it is ominous as we move deeper and deeper into a state of political and social dysfunction. Very important that. It is a stunning inability to be remotely It is a stunning inability to be remotely self-reflective or self-critical. And it is ominous as we move deeper and deeper into a state of... You teach your child that. If your child does something wrong, you teach them that. These people never accept accountability or responsibility for anything they do. Just look at the state of affairs in a current UK government with the Tory party. They never accept responsibility for what they do. It's always somebody else's fault. In this case, it's social media's fault. What Chris Hedges is saying, rather than look at why Donald Trump was elected, and if you believe the Russia thing, you're an idiot. That was bullshit, proven bullshit. Aaron Mate won an award for it. For disproving it. I'll talk you through that one time as well. It's absolutely fascinating. All to do with this Hunter Biden laptop shit. Oh, here we go. It's mentioned in the article. Here we go. So, let Chris Hedges say it because he can say it much better than me. What were my sins? I did not like my former employer, the New York Times, sell you a lie. I did not, like my former employer, the New York Times, sell you the lie of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, peddle conspiracy theories about Donald Trump being a Russian asset, put out a 10-part podcast called The Caliphate that was a hoax, or tell you that the information on Hunter Biden's laptop was disinformation. I did not prophesize that Joe Biden was the next FDR or that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election. This censorship is about supporting what, as I.F. Stone reminded us, governments always do: lie. Challenge the official lie, as I often did, and you will soon become a non-person on digital media. Julian Assange and Edward Snowden exposed the truth about the criminal inner workings of power. Look at where they are now. This censorship is one step removed from Joseph Stalin's whitewashing of non-persons, such as Leon Trotsky, out of the official photographs. It is a destruction of our collective memory. It removes those moments in media and the press when we attempted to examine our reality in ways the ruling class did not appreciate. The goal is to foster historical amnesia. If we don't know what happened in the past, we cannot make sense of the present. The moment we no longer have a free press, anything can happen. Hannah Arendt warned. What makes it possible for a totalitarian or any other dictatorship to rule is that people are not informed. How can you have an opinion if you are not informed? If everybody always lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. This is because lies, by their very nature, have to be changed, and a lying government has constantly to rewrite its own history. On the receiving end, you get not only one lie, a lie which you could go on for the rest of your days, but you get a great number of lies, dependent on how the political wind blows. And a people that can no longer believe anything cannot make up its mind. It is deprived not only of its capacity to act, but also of its capacity to think. And with such a people, you can then do what you please. I am not alone. YouTube regularly removes or demonetizes channels which happened to Progressive Soapbox without warning, usually by arguing that the content contained videos that violated YouTube's community guidelines. Status Quo, which filmed the January the 6th storming of the Capitol, was suspended from YouTube for advancing the false claims of election fraud. My video content, by the way, primarily consisted of book covers, quotes from passages of books, and author photos, but it got disappeared anyway. The deplatforming of voices like mine, already blocked by commercial media and marginalised with algorithms, is coupled with a pernicious campaign to funnel people back into the arms of the establishment media, such as CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. In the US, as Dorothy Parker once said about Katharine Hepburn's emotional range as an actress, any policy discussion ranges from A to B. Step outside of those lines and you're an outcast. The Ukraine war, which I denounce as a criminal war of aggression when it began, is a sterling example. Any effort to put it into historical context To suggest that the betrayal of the agreements by the West with Moscow, which I covered as a reporter in Eastern Europe during the collapse of the Soviet Union, along with the expansion of NATO, might have baited Russia into the conflict is dismissed. Nuance, complexity, ambiguity, historical context, self-criticism are all banished. My show, dedicated primarily to authors and their books, should have been if we had a functioning system of public broadcasting on PBS or NPR. That's in the US. That's like they're probably, well, like suppose BBC or RTE here. But public broadcasting is as captive to corporations and the wealthy as commercial media. Indeed, PBS and NPR run commercials in the guise of sponsorship acknowledgements. The last show on public broadcasting that examined the power was Moyers and Company. Once Bill Moyers went off the air in 2015, no one took his place. Final paragraph. A few decades ago, you could hear independent voices on public broadcasting, including Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Howard Zinn, Ralph Nader, Angela Davis, James Baldwin, and Noam Chomsky. No more. A few decades ago, there were a variety of alternative weeklies and magazines. A few decades ago, we still had a press that, however flawed, had not rendered whole segments of the population, especially the poor and social critics, invisible. It is perhaps telling that our greatest investigative journalist, Cy Hirsch, who exposed the massacre of 500 unarmed Vietnamese civilians by the US soldiers at the My Lai and torture at Abu Ghraib, has trouble publishing in the US. Isn't that unbelievable? I would direct you to the interview I did with Cy about the decayed state of the American media press, but it no longer exists on YouTube. And that, my friends, is the great Chris Hedges. So I'll give him the final word. Okay, I'm half hour into this. So he went on to the Democracy Now! Show with Amy Goodman, and he had this to say.
At first, Chris, you wrote a piece headlined "On Being Disappeared" about having your RT show's archive completely deleted, saying, "If this happens to me, it can happen to you, to any critic anywhere who challenges the dominant narrative." Chris Hedges, can you lay out what happened?
There was no notice, there was no warning, there was no inquiry, it just vanished. It's not surprising. I think if you go back and look at the 2017 Director of National Intelligence report, 7 pages were devoted to RT, and while they accused RT of disseminating Russian propaganda, all the examples that they cited in that report were that RT was giving a voice to Black Lives Matter activists, anti-fracking activists, Occupy activists, third-party candidates, all of which was true. And so I think this was the culmination. We expected it. I was on your show, by the way, when they deleted Trump from the social media and vigorously opposed it, not because I ever want to read another tweet by Donald Trump, but because we don't want these opaque entities, and they know everything about us. We know nothing about them, to wield this kind of censorship. What I didn't expect when I was arguing not to delete Trump from social media was that I would so quickly be one of the victims.
So do you have any access to this archive?
Through the RT.com on contact site is still up. I don't know how much longer, so we've copied them, so at least I'll have them. But no, off of YouTube, and you had hundreds of thousands of views for some of those shows, it's all gone. I want to stress that there wasn't one show on Russia. And the few times that we ever mentioned Putin or Russia was not in very flattering terms. I remember the great investigative journalist Alan Nairn using RT, I'm sure, on purpose to excoriate Russia for war crimes in Syria, but we broadcast it. This was a show that, if we had a functioning public broadcasting system, would be on probably late at night. I primarily interviewed authors. I'm an author myself, of course. I've written 14 books. and intellectuals that I admire, Cornel West, Noam Chomsky, Slavoj Žižek, and it was erased for its content. I mean, not because it was Russian propaganda, but because it wasn't, but because there's been such a marginalization of critics of anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism. I'm a very strong supporter, very public supporter of the boycott, divestment, sanction movement, which of course I think was the key issue that saw my great friend Cornel West denied tenure at Harvard. The walls have just closed in, Amy. Since I began as a reporter in Central America in the 1980s, there's less and less space for those who are willing to seriously challenge and question entrenched power. I mean, you do it, Alan does it, but it's become a pretty lonely profession. And of course, Bob Scheer, who I write for Scheer Post, but he doesn't have any money. He doesn't have any advertisers. It was also true when he ran Ramparts. So it's becoming harder and harder. I've gone to Substack like Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald, chrishedges.substack.com. And if I can get enough subscribers, I will fund the column and fund the show myself. But that's where we're left at. And of course, you pioneered that model for many of us.
And Chris, if you were on RT America right now, if it existed, if Direct TV hadn't canceled, taken RT America off, what would you be saying about Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Well,
I denounced Russia's invasion of Ukraine at the inception for the same reason I denounced our invasion and occupation of Iraq at the inception, for which, of course, I ran into conflict and had to leave the New York Times, because preemptive war under post-Nuremberg laws is a criminal war of aggression. And I was very clear about that. Now, RT went dark 6 days later. I have a hard time believing Moscow would have allowed me to publicly embrace that kind of critique and remain on the air. I mean, I don't know. That's conjecture. But yes, I can't. It would be deeply hypocritical to lambaste the United States for war crimes and not lambaste Vladimir Putin for war crimes. With this caveat, the invasion of Iraq, occupation of Iraq, was based on lies and fabrications. I believe I was in Europe in 1989 covering the revolutions in Eastern Europe. And this, of course, was, we assumed naively that NATO would be obsolete. NATO was created to prevent Soviet expansion in Central Europe. I saw the leaders of Margaret Thatcher and the Reagan administration, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, all promise Gorbachev that NATO would not be expanded beyond the borders of a unified Germany. Then later with the Clinton administration, after 13 or 14 states now, of course, are been integrated into NATO. Clinton administration promised not to station troops. This was another violation. Russia has every right to feel threatened and baited. That doesn't justify the war crime that they committed. I mean, they pulled the trigger. But again, this kind of understanding of the historical antecedents that led to the attack on the Ukraine. You've had Katrina on here. She, of course, knows Russia very well. That's almost unheard of within the kind of cheerleading for the media, within the mainstream media.
Katrina Vanden Heuvel, the publisher of The Nation. Chris, you wrote the award-winning book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. What does this war give Russia in terms of meaning?
Well, I just read the New York Times this morning, and they're talking about Putin's approval ratings going through the roof. That's what war does. It unleashes all sorts of dark, toxic poisons, including the poison of nationalism, which we imbibed in Iraq, and I think to a certain extent are imbibing now, ignoring the 2 decades of egregious war crimes that we committed in the Middle East. The idea that somehow NATO is a defensive organization would be greeted with ridicule in countries like Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or anywhere else, or Libya or anywhere else. So, yeah, of course, every society is susceptible to that dark elixir. Russia's no exception. They've, of course, turned on their press, and they're drinking deep from it. But we're as guilty of that sin as the Russians.
What would you say to critics that say RT America, RT, was an outlet for Russian state propaganda, which is why it was targeted for removal by YouTube?
Well, to a certain extent, that's probably true, but are we better off not hearing what Russia has to say, not understanding why they think the way they do? I was a foreign correspondent for 20 years. My job was to be culturally, linguistically, historically, religiously literate, to step into the shoes of a Syrian or an Iraqi or a Palestinian, and of course I spent 6 years in Latin America and then later in Yugoslavia, and explain how the world looked from their vantage point, why they felt the way they did. And oftentimes the grievances they have are very legitimate. I certainly think that Putin's complaints about the expansion of NATO have a great deal of credibility. It's just a historical fact that the leaders of the West lied to Gorbachev, lied to Yeltsin, and lied to Putin. That's just historically true. We're not a better world by shutting down these outlets and essentially living within our own echo chamber, especially when we wield the kind of military power that we do wield. And this gets into the whole collapse of foreign reporting. It's kind of gone the way of the dinosaurs, but it's extremely important, especially when you're an imperial.
So there we go. What do you think of that? If you don't know who Chris Hedges is, I couldn't urge you more. You obviously know I'm a huge admirer of the man. Go and visit him at, he mentioned it a few times, he has his only major outlet at the minute is SharePost. So it's spelled SCHEERPOST, SharePost, all one word, and Chris Hedges, CHRIS, HEDGES, Chris Hedges, and you'll find him there and all his most recent articles. And a lot of the articles they were actually put up in conjunction with what he was putting out on his On Contact. So he would write this article and do this TV show about, so I'm looking at one here, Hedges, Hedon, James Joyce's Ulysses, as he mentioned, John Pilger on Julian Assange's extradition appeal, Chris Hedges, America's New Class War, Chris Hedges, the persecution of Julian Assange. You know, that's the sort of stuff that he does he does all sorts of stuff. He's brilliant. But I'll put the link in the profile. So, onwards. So now we're going to talk about the cost of living. So as we all know, the cost of living, the cost of everything has gone up. It's gone through the roof. I actually, I drive now during the day. Although, as I'm pleased to say, I've had a word with my boss. I'll be doing less of that. As I go forward, be doing more proper work. Not that that's not proper work. Proper work for me. I was actually at a house. I was delivering to a house, believe it or not. I deliver groceries for one of them big companies. And as you know, I like it. I was delivering groceries to this house, and it was a lovely house. Wealthy people. They actually had a windsock at the front of the house, which means they had an airplane or an airfield, or a helicopter or an airfield at the back of the house. It was beautiful. It was up in the lower slopes of the Mourns and along Kilkeel side. And the lady of the house who I got talking to, as I do when I get a chance, if I've got time I always stop and talk to people, and I love that bit of it. That's my favourite bit of the job. And I got talking to her, and she was saying about, if she brought it up or I brought it up, I can't remember. She was saying about the groceries that she was getting for the money that she was spending. She was only spending 60 quid, right? 70 quid, something like that. And she was all, that's like 60, 70 quid. And she says, when I started doing this 2 years ago, I had to buy extra stuff to get my basket to go over £40 so I could get the free delivery. So she would get the basket. So I think the delivery's like 6 quid. She would get the basket and she'd look at it and it would be like £36.50 or something. So it makes sense, right? So to get it over to £40 plus a penny, she would have to buy extra things to get the free delivery, and essentially saving a couple of quid. And she says that same basket today is over 60 quid, and that's it there on the floor. So if even the wealthy notice it, can you imagine? Now, how the rest of us are, and I know I'm talking to, I'm assuming there's not too many millionaires fucking listening to this podcast. And if there are, would you please send me some fucking money, sponsor me? I'm talking, there's a demo here on the YouTube. You should, and I know I announce these things late and all the rest of it, but Damo's talking to me here on the YouTube, so I'll give him a shout out. Hey Damo, UK, and he says UK government deflect from accountability by waiting on reports, currently sue Grays, and play down culpability by insisting things should be looked at in the round, in inverted commas, air quotes, so they can muddy water around an issue. Absolutely. And he continues, and the UK press are in cahoots with the government to advance their owners' interests by influencing government policy with the threat of bad press and or other revelations to ensure compliance of government ministers. Well, that also goes on in the party with the parties with the whipping process, doesn't it? And he continues, meanwhile, UK government are clipping the wings of the judiciary, the police, the civil service, the BBC, with threats of defunding or weakening of such institutions so they can't hold government to account. And then he says there was some windsock coming off the Annalong Valley. And he's absolutely correct. So, okay, so onwards. Thanks for that, Demo, appreciate it. So we're expected to believe, and the narrative has been spun, as you well know, and the story is being carried in a large part by the media, that our cost of living crisis is directly because of the war in Ukraine and the invasion by Russia, and again, as I say, all these things I have to qualify because we are living in cult times at the minute, is wrong. And by the way, when I say that the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is wrong, I'm not saying it's my opinion. I'm not saying it's a fucking war crime laid down in the Geneva Convention. It's a war crime. It's not my opinion. It's a fact. They've fucked up. They've committed war crime here by virtue of the fact that they're doing it. When Chris Hedges is talking about it and other people are talking about it, and I'm happy to skirt on their coattails of these geniuses, we're trying to give context, and I'm not trying to put myself into the same bracket as Chris Hedges. We're trying to give context. That's all. Historical context as to why a thing might happen. But we live in a cult, and you're not allowed to do that. So, the cost of living started before the invasion of Ukraine. So I'm going to read you a little quick article from The Guardian. It's a couple of paragraphs. The largest exclusive oil company's profits soared $174 billion this year as US gas prices rose. Let me just check the date on this. 6th of December 21. The largest oil and gas companies made a combined of $174 billion in profits in the first 9 months of the year as gasoline prices climbed in the US, according to a new report. The bumper profit totals provided exclusively to The Guardian show that in the third quarter of 21 alone, 24 top oil and gas companies made more than $74 billion in net income from January to September. The net income of the group, which includes Exxon, Chevron, Shell and BP, was $174 billion. Exxon alone posted a net income of $6.75 billion in the third quarter, and so on and so forth. There's no point in me reading all the rest. You know what it's all, you know, it's just, there's a load of numbers. It says, so it gets down to the point here. But oil and gas companies have shown little willingness so far to ramp up production to help reduce costs. So supply, demand, keep supply down, demand high. What happens? You get a increased price for your product. Unless your product is your labour. Can you dig it? Unless your product is your labour. In America at the moment, there has been what's called the quitdemic. 20 million workers, low-paid workers, haven't gone back to work. Either quit their jobs or haven't gone back to work after the pandemic. Well, that creates a what? What does that create? That creates a demand. You create a demand, you get an increased price for your product. Your product is labour. Your labour should go up in price. It's not. They're not paying people more. They're not offering more money. And they won't. They won't offer more money. This is the point. This is the class war. It's always about that. They will shutter these businesses before they pay you more. Especially if you're just an individual worker working in a restaurant. It's different if you're organised in a big place and you can shut shit down. That's different. If that gives you the power and you've got the control. So according to Capitalism 101, you create demand, you increase price, free market, basic bullshit economics. But that's true when it comes to gas and oil. But when it comes to your labour, it's not true. So Americans looking for someone to blame the pain and experience at the pump need no look further than wealthy oil and gas company executives who choose to line their own pockets rather than lower gas prices, with the billions of dollars in profit oil rakes in month after month. The analysis of the major companies' financials shows that 11 great. So I went on to Yahoo Finance and I wanted to take a look at the oil and share prices, right? So if we go back, this is crude oil from, got it back, right back here to the middle of November. From the middle of November, I'm on this chart, and it shows you, right? So that article was written in December, right? And the price was per barrel, $80 per barrel. And I'm going along here, and by the time you get to the 14th of November, it had gone down a few bit, and it had gone up a little bit. It's at $70 a barrel. Then it goes up to, by the time you get to January, it's up to $78 a barrel. By the time you get to February, it's $90 a barrel. Now, that article was written in December, and I look back this year, so I'll go back a year. I can do this here on this little thing. It's very clever. So November, October, so there's the whole, May 21 to December 21, right? It finishes December 21 at $80 a barrel, more or less, right? We move into February, just less. Move into February, January, it goes up to $80 a barrel. And I'm looking at this, and it looks like a profile shot of the Matterhorn, all jaggedy, but always going up. Up, 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 down a wee bit, up, 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 down a wee bit, up, 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 up. We're now in 14th of February. It's at $95.46 a barrel. 28th of February, $99.2 a barrel. I wonder what it was on my birthday, 10th of February. Let me check. It's quite macabre, isn't it? It was $89. I wonder was that a day that... Let me just zoom in. Oh, I see I can do it. This is a class wee device. It went up on my birthday. Kind of disappoints me a little bit. I was hoping it would go down. That the cosmic energy of my birth would cause it to collapse, but no, it didn't. So we're getting on up. So we'll go to and we get to the beginning of March, 8th of March. $123 a barrel. That's the peak. It peaked. And now it is sitting. It went to, then it goes down to 114, and now it is sitting at a mere $99 a barrel, practically giving it away. Right? So that's what we're talking about. Now, in that article, they give away they give it away. The oil and gas companies have shown little willingness so far to ramp up production to help reduce costs. Increase production, reduce costs. They're not doing that. They're taking advantage of bloated prices, fleecing American families along the way. Not just American families. This is a reflection on the American system, which is ripples through and deflects onto the rest of us, doesn't it? So, a glut of new oil drilling has made the US awash with oil in recent years, turning the country into a top-level exporter. So remember I was talking to you the other week there about the US used to get the most of its oil from Saudi Arabia, but recently it's now down to 500,000 barrels a day rather than the 2.5 million which it needs, what you used to get or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but it was 2.5 million and now it's down to 500,000. So then America putting the thumb screws into Saudi Arabia doesn't work as well anymore, because then along comes China and says, well, we'll take it, we'll have that, so now the Saudis are considering using Chinese yuan for the currency, right? So that's where we are. So this idea, and I've just proven to you there that this cost of living crisis, which is largely focused around oil prices, right, started way before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because I'm literally looking at it in Yahoo Finance right now. It's going up and up and up and up and up. I've just read you an article from The Guardian from December 2021 talking about the same thing. And by the way, December 21, I've got it here. It was sitting, I'll just pull that over there. It was sitting at a mere $76 a barrel. Free compared to today. $99 a barrel. So, okay. So there we go. So, I want to play you a little interview. Very short. EU interviews. Yeah. So here we go. A little interview. Now, in the UK, obviously, I'm an Irishman living under occupation in the northern bit of it. So, the British government are the ones that control what goes on over here. Not that anything better is going on down south, but Rishy Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, whose wife is a billionaire on paper, right? They're multi-millionaires. These people are beyond wealthy. He was interviewed. He went on to LBC, and he was answering calls from people called in. Now, I was surprised and delighted that this lady managed to get through and also managed to grill the prick. And she did, but she was very cool, very calm, very collected. But the story she tells is harrowing. Harrowing. And more common than it should be. So, let's have a little listen to see what she says to the fucking wanker.
Who on paper has a good job and what's considered a good salary, but unfortunately the rising cost of everything, especially energy,
Let me just put that back. Sorry. I'll just get that back to the start. Don't know what happened there. Should have started. Okay, I got it. Here we go. Sorry, we'll go again. Here we go.
Who on paper has a good job and what's considered a good salary, but unfortunately the rising costs of everything, especially energy, have now put an intense strain on my ability to provide for my children. The significant increase in our energy bill has meant that we don't have the boiler on. The lights are always off unless absolutely necessary, and when it's cold we wear jumpers and coats, and sometimes you can see our breaths when we breathe. Now, despite working a full-time job, I'm having to find ways to bridge the gap. I've started cleaning houses, and I spend every evening riding a bike, delivering for Uber Eats. I've managed to cut my grocery shop down to just £15 a week for an adult and 2 children, and I often go without myself to make sure the kids get what they need in their fed. A £150 grant towards energy bills, which have risen by an average of £2,000 a year, just isn't going to cut it. I've just about been able to balance things up until this point, but I'm now facing paying out more each month than I'm making. What are you going to do to address the soaring cost of energy? And if you're not doing anything, please tell me what else you suggest I can be doing to help myself.
Well, Hazel, thanks for your question. And look, I can't imagine how difficult your job is, right? I've got 2 kids as well, and I, have, as I said, obviously my wife and other helped with us. So, enormous admiration for what you're doing. And it sounds like you're working your socks off to look after them. So tribute to you. But to put more money in your pocket, as you said, the measure I announced today, I'm sure will help you. And that was a significant tax cut on national insurance. So again, not knowing your particular circumstances, but a typical worker is going to see £330 tax cut starting in July. And, I hope that that's helpful to you and your kids.
Does that include the 1.2% rise? Well, because you're putting up national insurance by 1.2% in April and then cutting it for people at the lower end.
The combination of those 2 things mean that 70% of workers, and probably, Hazel, given the situation she described herself being in, would be in this category. 70% of workers will pay less tax even after accounting for the new levy. So it will really help put extra cash in people's pockets starting in July.
OK, Hazel, a quick response from you?
I think the response from Rishi is difficult because the support that is apparently being offered just isn't relative at all to what the rising costs are for us. And, the fact that energy is going to be going up again in October, despite how significantly it has gone up already, you're going to see more and more people relying on food banks, then also not able to afford to work. And you're going to have people in low-income families or families such as myself who may well get very, very ill because they're unable to afford to heat.
Right, so I'm sure you got the full weight of that. I'm sure you're not just taking that just as calmly as Mr. Sunak seems to. But there's a thing that you must understand, and I genuinely believe this. When Rishy Sunak said to her, I have 2 kids, I understand, right? That fucking girl has gone to some sort of media training and they've told him, first thing you must do is if you come across a certain character like this that's a little difficult, empathise, say something. No doubt a thumb, they do the thumb pointing, point with your thumb and say something like, I know what that, I know I've got to, and look away. So in this instance he says, oh yeah, I've got 2 kids too. That's his way of trying to make, to equalise the playing field. Let me say that. There's no way Rishi Sunak can possibly empathise with this woman. He is literally incapable of it. He doesn't understand her. He doesn't understand what she means. He doesn't understand what she says. And most importantly, he doesn't care. This is a man whose personal wealth is in the hundreds and hundreds of millions. Personal wealth is in the hundreds and hundreds of millions. And what does he choose to do with his life? Join the fucking Tory party and skin the working class. Blame the working class. He is ideologically opposed to everything that we, the working class need to feel a part of society, a part of community. He's opposed to social mobility. He's opposed to everything. He's opposed to the NHS. He's opposed to the post office. He's opposed to having any form of public ownership. Now, the public ownership is the commons. The commons is us. That's what we do together. And the idea that capitalism is the only way that we've all been propagandized, is the only way that we can live, is the only way we must live. There's nothing else beyond it's complete fucking nonsense. The commons, which is the root of communism, is where we used to graze our sheep. The commons. You bring your sheep to get grazed on the commons. That's what you used to do, your cattle. You have to have these spaces. You have to have commons to live. Modern commons are social media. So Chris Hedges wouldn't be kicked off social media or YouTube if it wasn't. If it is a monopoly, if anti-trust laws were actually enforced, YouTube wouldn't exist, Facebook wouldn't exist, Twitter wouldn't exist. Anytime another company comes up that looks like it's going to threaten their hegemony, they buy them out. Remember, Facebook bought WhatsApp for $20 billion. That was about fucking 6 years ago. WhatsApp's just a tiny little thing. Facebook saw that it was a threat, so they bought it. YouTube have done the same. Google have done the same. Well, Google is YouTube. Now, Google did buy YouTube. And they all do the same. Okay? So, the idea that, that's on social media, in the physical world, national grids, oil companies, hospitals, ambulance services, elder care services, mental health services, care in the community services. These are things that we can do. And how do we pay for them? Well, I just read you an article a moment ago where it was explained the amount of profits just from one industry that is creating a fake inflation. A fake inflation. Okay? Let's take the profits from... Let's privatise one oil company. That will act as a leveller for all the rest of them. Just one. Privatise one of them. Nationalise one of them. The profits from that go into a sovereign wealth fund which get used to pay for things that we need to fund the commons. And everyone else will have to. So, onwards. So when he says that he understands, he cannot, mentally and physically and spiritually and emotionally cannot empathise with that woman at any fucking level whatsoever. It's impossible. He doesn't get it. There was pictures of him during the week there filling up a car at a Sainsbury's petrol station. They go borrow the fucking car off a worker. It was a little Renault Clio or something. He doesn't own a fucking Renault Clio. Wise up. Like, he owns a fucking Renault Clio. So, now, Demo is on, he says here on YouTube as well, Sunak repeatedly raising taxes, then rolling back ever so slightly on a single tax raise is insulting to people who are struggling to make ends meet. It's exactly the point. This is exactly the point. Tory MP Kit Malthouse tried to identify with people struggling to pay for heating by claiming he and his family had to turn off their heating on his salary with all his expenses and perks. Wonder if the UK government refusal to impose a windfall tax on oil and gas companies is in any way related to the political donations or connections. Why does VIP, PPE contracts spring to mind? Remember that? Unbelievable. Demo's fucking 100% spot on. Couldn't agree more with all of that. So, that poor woman, and she's obviously not giving up. I wouldn't like to fall out with her. This woman's got fucking balls of steel. or tits of steel, whatever you want to call it. She's obviously a good one, one of the good ones. She's on her knees. And what does she do? She goes and gets a job working for Uber Eats, riding a bike at night. They're choosing between heat and food. And what does Rishy Sunak say? We're going to give you some money back off a rise in national insurance, which shouldn't happen anyway, if we hadn't have fucking spunked away £1 billion worth of public money on VAP PPE contracts. Which, over the course of providing that money for those VAP PPE contracts, the same Tory government has been in quiet selling off little tranches of the NHS to private equity firms, hedge funds, and American healthcare providers. So the NHS has been privatised by stealth. So the money that they're raising from the NHS to cover the losses that they created over COVID, over lockdown, is only going to end up going into the hands of private equity anyway. Can you dig it? So, nearly done. So this is where we are. Right, I just want to pull this up. Where little quick blast through these, then we're going to call this because it's getting on. Cost of living, 5 million households now in fuel poverty. This is written by, it's on Sky News, written by James Sillars. There are calls for an emergency budget. Sorry, let me just get the date on this, just so that Friday the 1st of April is today. There are calls for an emergency budget. This is just after Rishi Sunak had his budget just last week. For an emergency budget, as an unprecedented increase in the energy price cap is applied, with warnings of worse to come when bills start to reflect of Russia's war in Ukraine. The day the 22 million households have been dreading has finally arrived. April Fool's Day sees the energy price cap rising by a record sum to help account for the surging wholesale prices, with bills yet to reflect the impact of Russia's war in Ukraine. It was announced in February that the customers on default tariffs paying by direct debit would see an average annual increase. Now, let's listen to this. From £693 annually to an increase from £1,277 to £1,961, an increase of £683. Well, it's prepayment costs, so you pay in advance. So going from £1,309 to £2,017, an increase of £1,709, right? Now, the reason that the authors talked about the Russian the effects of the war in Ukraine is because the EU, Europe, got 45% of its natural gas from Russia. Germany specifically got 20% of its natural gas from Russia. The pipeline was shut down. Sanctions were put on basically the way they did it was the US put sanctions on the company that owned the pipeline. That shut them down. So now the EU has signed a deal to import its natural gas from the USA. No, I don't believe you. Yeah, honest to God, it's true. So the gas that we used to get from Russia, which was just over there, we now have to turn into LPG, liquid gas, ship it across the ocean, unrefine it or re-refine it in Europe, and then send it out. So it makes the gas what? It makes the gas more expensive. Now we haven't had the impact of that yet. So the two pipelines that were shut down, now we're going to be getting whatever they provided from the USA. Right? Now, we're paying for that. Now, as I've said all along, one of the things, I understand the Ukrainian position. I get it. I understand. I don't agree with it. I do think that being neutral, not joining NATO and all that, I think that was the way to go. I think it made more sense to me. I may be wrong, but that's what I thought. Seeing out the terms of the 2014 Minsk agreement, I thought that was a good idea. Okay? So I understand their position. Russia, I don't agree with them invading Ukraine. Of course I don't. It's a war crime, and I hope somebody ends up in The Hague, but I hope they end up in The Hague alongside George W. Bush and Tony Blair and among others, but which isn't going to happen. But I don't, as much as I don't agree with them doing it, I understand why they did it. There was a build-up of troops to go into the Donbass. The Donbass people, 14,000 of them killed in 8 years. Don't forget that. Ukraine may not have been in NATO, but NATO was in Ukraine. As Chris Hedges put it, they were baited into doing this, and they did it. If Chris Hedges says it, I'm going to take it as being as close to the truth as you can get. Right? So I understand their motivation. Again, I'm not agreeing with them, but I understand what happened. I understand why they made the decision to do what they did. I understand why the Ukraine made the decision to do what they did, what they've done. Don't agree with them, but I get it. The USA, I understand what their decision to do what they did. I get it all. For them, it was money. They were feeding money into the military-industrial complex and the energy companies. I get it. The people that I genuinely cannot fucking fathom is the Europeans. Why have we gone along with this? The German trade unions put out a statement during the week saying that the German government, or a couple of weeks ago, the German government has ended production in Germany. Germany's still a manufacturing economy. They still make things, unlike the UK. They said they've ended the manufacturing economy. It's over. We need this energy supply. I genuinely don't get it. I don't get what the Europeans have to get out of this. And who's going to pay? First of all, who's going to pay the most? The Ukrainian person, ordinary person like you and me. And then secondly, Europe. Who's going to benefit? The USA. So I don't get why any of this, why diplomacy and negotiation wasn't pushed from the start. Whenever the Americans decided that they were going to, the Germans had to agree to it to shut down that pipeline. The Germans should have went, you want us to do fucking what? Are you mad? We're not shutting this down. That's suicide for us. We need this. We've come to rely on this. We need this. No. We need to find another way. That's what should have happened. But it didn't happen. Just went, oh, okay. Everyone got wrapped up in this blue and yellow fever. And that's not to unempathise or to as I said, the biggest losers in all of this are going to be the Ukrainians, who NATO and the US are prepared to fight to the last drop of blood in the last Ukrainian. To do what? To get money, to send money, to provide money to these companies. And we're going to pay for it through the nose at the pump. Whenever we go to put money into our cards and on our meters and pay for things, pay as we go and all this. On our prepayment schemes, I just read out, you're going to be going up by 600 and 700 pounds a year. Do you know? So, I'm going to finish. The last word I'm going to give to, this was written on March 20th, 2 days ago. The gas deal between the US and the EU is important, but it won't be able to make up the shortfall from Russia. Former US Energy Secretary Dan Brulette said on Monday, the US said it will work with international partners to provide at least 15 billion cubic metres more liquefied natural gas to Europe this year. In 21, the European Union imported 155 billion cubic meters of natural gas from Russia. Now, how the fuck is this going to work? The US will provide at least 15 billion cubic meters more liquefied than they're already providing. But from Russia, the EU imported 155 billion cubic meters. And he goes on to say, frankly, I'm not quite sure that everyone can make up that shortfall. That's an enormous amount of gas. Yes, it fucking is. It sounds quite a lot. However, the gas deal is very important and private industry and governments will have to fill the gap. How? He added that Germany should also build regas facilities to convert LNG, liquid natural gas, from liquid into gas to support the shift away from Russian energy in the short term. So we get it from Russia as gas. We get it from America as liquid natural gas, LNG. You need to build refineries to turn it back into gas. So it comes up as gas, it's turned into liquid natural gas, put into containers, shipped across the ocean, liquid natural gas, turned into normal gas, and then goes into the system. So there you go. EU, and then I wonder, should I just, it was a wee thing that it caught my attention. I'm just going to see if I can just pull it up real quick. I'm going to give the last word to Demo because he was very good to talk to me while I was on the podcast here. No, I'm not going to bother with it. So that's me. I'm done. Whew, that was heavy. And I'm very tired. So, Demo man, thanks very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Demo sent in his last message there, and I actually downloaded the video. So I'm going to start the next podcast with this. I downloaded that interview while we were listening to that lady talk to Rishy Sunak. So Demo says UK. Where are we here? Sorry, let me just. Yes. So Martin Lewis, money saving expert, recently said, "In no way is the cost of living crisis due to the war in Ukraine, which Rishi Sunak tried to insinuate in his recent piss-poor, heartless spring budget. I wonder if the UK government refusal to impose a windfall tax on gas and oil companies," I've already read that, "is in any way related to political donations or connections. Why does VIP PPE contracts spring to mind? Sunak repeatedly raising taxes, then rolling back ever so slightly on a single tax raise is insulting to people who are struggling to make ends meet. And UK government stealth undermining of NHS by underfunding it. Point out issues, then unveil privatisation as a solution to the problem they deliberately caused in the first place." Absolutely, and that's exactly what's happening. Thanks, Demo man. Appreciate it. Nice chatting with you too, my friend. There we go. That's okay, everybody. So that's me done. I'm going to go into the house and spend this Saturday night with my loved ones, as I hope you are able to do as well. So thanks for listening to Politics, Culture and Some Other Shit. Like, share, subscribe, please. And you'll be able to, those of you that listen to this on your way to work on Monday morning. Sorry. Good night.